So, what we are commencing at the moment is the Spring Creativity Conference of the Central Division of the Societies for the Philosophy of Creativity. And they have joined with the American Institute of Philosophical and Cultural Thought, AIPCT, here for the last, actually 3 years if we count the Kasira session. This is the third year that we've held our Central Division meeting at AIPCT. We used to hold them with the APA Central Division, the American Philosophical Association. But having discovered that, as a matter of fact, at least in the middle part of the United States, we're much more likely to reach a wider audience by just holding them here as opposed to Chicago or some other gigantic city. Things have moved over here. And so this year's conference is the cultural power of personal objects, and I'm going to let Jared tell you a little bit about what that idea was, but for our purposes, what we want to do is thank the Foundation for the Philosophy of Creativity for sponsoring this event, and we have 6 presentations, one of which was this afternoon, a residency lecture, and 5 more. So I hope everybody will come back tomorrow, beginning in the morning, Kevin Taylor, with Asian, Japanese objects that come to life, and especially vengeful Japanese objects.
No movies.
Now featuring clips from The Grudge, right?
Exactly. So I appreciate Jared Kimling for helping me, and in fact mainly organizing this event, and I'm now going to turn it over to him to introduce our first speaker.
Okay. Do you want to give me? Should I give a spiel first before?
A spiel? Well, you should tell him how. You should tell him how this all happened.
Well, that's what you said.
Yeah.
Randy is forcing these duties on me very last moment, so I'm just
I am not.
rolling with the punches here. So there was a personalism conference, I think the Boston one, a couple years ago. Is it Boston?
No, it's Cullowhee.
Oh, was it in Cullowhee?
Yes.
Yeah. That a few people did a panel on personal objects. And I wasn't able to attend the conference, but my dissertation was on a very similar theme. And so I was very interested in this idea. And so I thought about putting together a volume. And Randy helped a lot with this, enormously, actually. And we put together a volume. It's actually being reviewed by SUNY Press after a few editor changes over at SUNY. And so as an extension of that, we thought about maybe hosting a conference here at AIPCT, and a number of people were able to come and to present their papers that hopefully will be in that published volume, knowing the Academy anywhere from 5 to 10 years from now.
Not that long.
Yeah, right. And so, as Randy said, we have our presenter today, and then a number of presenters tomorrow that hopefully you guys will be back to see. But today, our keynote speaker is Carrie McLachlan, right?
Keynote?
Your keynote!
Yeah, sure. Keynote.
You are, right? And I'm going to read your biography, so correct me if this is wrong here.
She wrote it.
She wrote it, so she'll be right. Carrie teaches American Indian religious traditions at Western Carolina University, where she also assisted Sequoyah Professor Tom Hatley to create a more robust Cherokee Studies program. She has published 2 articles on the mythological significance of dogs in Cherokee and American Indian traditions. She has 3 amazing children and 4 exceptional grandchildren. Very important facts. And I won't go through the abstract.
And I have a wonderful husband,
And a
too.
wonderful husband.
Sorry, I forgot to put that in.
He'll get a chance to talk tomorrow. Tomorrow he'll get a chance to talk, all right? But I'll let you...
My bio either.
I'll let you introduce your paper and go ahead and read it. And then once she's done, we'll have, I think, plenty of time for Q&A. So...
Okay, I'm just going to read the paper. I don't know about introducing it. Cherokee non-human persons in dual realms. Okay. What constitutes a person will always be subject to interpretation, but after positing a working definition of person, I will consider 2 important non-human Cherokee persons, the river and corn, who physically live on earth as well as above in the sky realm. These beings would not normally be considered persons in Western religious and philosophical thought. Not only would they not be considered persons, they would be considered impersonal objects. But in the Cherokee worldview, they and many other impersonal objects are persons. 60 years after Marcel Mauss's 1928 essay, A Category of the Mind, The Notion of Person, the Notion of Self, Cambridge University published a volume of essays in response. In one of those essays, The Person, Charles Taylor claims his views are mainly compatible with Mauss's, suggesting a rough correspondence. Beyond a representative view of the person as a reflective being with a sense of self as an agent able to make choices and hold values, Taylor suggests that one becomes a person by making strong evaluations. A person has the capacity to experience emotion, for example, shame before others. To be a person, a being must have language, which creates a common ground, a public space. This is accomplished through interaction with other persons. While Charles Taylor excludes animals as persons, Marcel Mauss's view is expansive enough to include non-human persons. Mauss suggests that in primal cultures, clan affiliation, naming practices, and perceived relationships between the living and the dead are elements that helped define persons. Taylor suggests that we have partly lost some of these concepts by which a person has an inner sense of personal significance linked to, quote, some force or to some region which lies outside us, end quote. The loss is significant as this perspective is one way in which persons become interlocutors. From this point of view, persons are part of an exchange that pre-exists us. Persons become an, quote, agent plus by being inducted as interlocutor into some great conversation. To have the name or perhaps the mask is to be the interlocutor. Traditionally, the Cherokee are part of a civilization that allows individuals to be part of a great conversation that includes persons beyond an individual's own community of time and space. Persons such as ancestors and creator beings, animals, plants, and what James Mooney called elemental beings, such as fire, water, and sun, are beings with whom the Cherokee converse. And I should have a little footnote here, which I have on the first page, is that many Cherokee have adopted Euro-American perspectives and may not have a Cherokee worldview. But I am basing the Cherokee worldview concept that are based on their cultural narratives, what the cultural narratives tell us about a traditional Cherokee worldview. Okay. All right, so from what has been recorded of the Cherokee worldview, the real people, the Ani Yunwiya, are what Charles Taylor called agents plus. Humans living in a complex interrelational system with non-human persons who would also be considered agents plus. While I'm not aware of a Cherokee explanation of what constitutes a person, we have a few references to non-human beings who are considered persons. According to Will West Long, a Cherokee traditionalist, fire is personal. And I have a little quotation here from him. The fire on the hearth, and he uses the past tense. So I'm just going to use his words. The fire on the hearth had an intensely spiritual nature, was human in thought, consciousness, intent, emotions, etc., and was in fact an old woman who was a grandmother in kin terms. She was a member of the family and the household. Proper treatment of the fire was essential to the well-being of the family, protecting the family from witch attack and many other ills, end quote. That fire is human in thought, consciousness, intent, emotions, and is an interactive member of the family, protecting them as they care for her, suggests fire is an agent plus. She actively communicates she actively communicates by offering families protection. Also, through the way sacrifices to fire are accepted by the fire, priests are able to divine messages from her. Similarly, ethnographer James Mooney indicates that the Cherokee consider ginseng an animate and sentient being. Ginseng is an important and powerful healer. Before taking a portion of the ginseng root, the doctor would address it as Great Otawehi, and then would humbly ask permission to take a small piece of its flesh. Now, an Otawehi is a person with great power, and mythological beings would have great power, but also a shaman, some shamans, the greatest of the shamans, would be considered Otawehi too. So the question of what constitutes a person from an American Indian perspective has been addressed to some degree for the Iroquois, Haudenosaunee, the linguistic siblings of the Cherokee. David Blanchard's study suggests that at least in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Haudenosaunee conceived of two metaphysical aspects of being. First, Nigoner, translated consciousness, and second, a living principle or generic property of matter contained in all substance. Those living beings who are conscious have an awareness of self and others and are persons. So from an Iroquoian viewpoint, while all things are living, not all living things are conscious persons having an awareness of self and others. Among those living beings who are conscious persons, there are two types, sky persons and this world persons. Blanchard mentions one person or group of exceptional persons who fit both categories of being both a sky and this world person. And this is a paragraph quotation, but I think it's really important, so I'm going to read it. In the Iroquoian cosmogony, the universe consists of the sky world and this world on the back of the great turtle. Furthermore, they believe that this world is a material reflection of the sky world. The sky world is populated by Ongwi Shona, or First Peoples. This world is inhabited by Ongwi Honwi, real men, material recreations. So they're material recreations of the Ongwi Shona of the sky world. Both the Ongwi Honwi and the Ongwi Shona are considered as persons by the Iroquois, that is, as having a consciousness and an awareness of self and others. The Iroquois further acknowledge that there are human as well as non-human persons. This is true of the persons who inhabit the sky world and the earth. For example, corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters of the Iroquois myth and legend, are persons, although not human, who exist as both Ongwi Shona and Ongwi Honwe. To be both a sky and this world person, or an original first person, one of the original first peoples, and also a material recreation at the same time, seems to denote a being of special significance. We will see that some Cherokee persons are both types of persons, existing from the sky world and this world. And I've cut out a lot. Cherokee persons are beings conscious of self and others who are in relation with other persons. That's one of the things that I cut out, was the idea that's very important in a lot of Native, if not all, Native American thought, the idea of reciprocity. So at least in the Cherokee worldview, non-human persons are perceived as having language. We will see that the Cherokee, I guess I'm skipping that part. The Cherokee corn woman and long person, the river, are two non-human persons that I'm going to highlight. So they are both persons who exist in dual realms. So I will focus on Shelu, the corn woman, and the Cherokee River long person, Yunwi Gunahita. According to one account recorded in the 1830s, the Cherokee primal mother, like the Iroquois woman who fell from the skies, came to earth from above at the time of creation. Sequoyah, who in the 1830s was described as one of the most aged men in the Cherokee Nation, revealed that the Cherokee Corn Mother had been brought down from the skies. When asked the name of the woman, Sequoyah says, "I never heard the name. The person had no name, but that person was a woman. She had 2 children. Both were sons." A half-century later, James Mooney gave her a name, Shelu, the Cherokee word for corn. The accounts Mooney obtained from Cherokee traditionalists Swimmer and John Axe are similar in many details to Sequoyah's earlier narrative, though each reveal different concepts and details. All indicate that the sons of the Corn Mother and Hunter Father came to the mistaken conclusion that their mother was a witch because she produces food from her body, and for this reason they determined to kill her. Knowing their thoughts, the Corn Mother instructs her sons how to provide crops for themselves after she is gone. In the Sequoyah account, the Corn Mother's instructions also suggest the type of person she is, a being of the dual realms, who remains an ideal relational being, caring for her children even when they betray the relation. And she says to them, and this is quite a long quotation, but it is even more important than the others. She says, "Sons, your minds are bewildered and your senses gone, and your mother must be killed by her own sons. But I found food for you, and I was your food, and in killing your mother, you yourselves will fill yourselves with evil. But your mother will remain a mother to you, even though you kill her. Take heed, therefore, and treasure up her words. You may think that I am killed, but I shall not be dead. Do my bidding, for I shall be alive both on earth and in the skies. Do my bidding, and when I am killed, drag my body to and fro over a large space. From the spot over which you drag my body, I shall come out upon the earth, and from my habitation in heaven, I shall see whether you do my bidding and toil earnestly to cause me to increase upon the earth. When you see me risen about 1 foot from the earth, you are to labor all around me and take away every weed that may have come along to clog my growth. And though the sun burn you when you do this, and though your work make you very weary, do not falter, but remember I am your mother, and call upon me with songs and let me hear you. When you have discharged these duties, and when you shall have sung this song, I shall then be in a fair way of growing to maturity. You will see me almost grown. You will see me fully grown. I shall lift my head proudly. You will look on me and be glad, and be sure that you are careful of me, for elsewhere you shall find no milk whose source is inexhaustible like mine." And then it goes on, and then it says, "And then you are to take me by the hand and draw me towards you, and to prepare me for a feast. And when the feast is ready for your eating, and when you shall be placed before it, you are to make your invocations first towards the east, and then towards the north, and thirdly towards the west, and fourthly towards the south. Then you are to stand in the center of the 4 points, and to call to me above, for I shall be there, and I shall hear you if you call, and when I hear you, I will take fast hold upon your mind and bring it back to what it ought to be." This narrative, so that's the end of that, this narrative identifies the Corn Mother as a person and makes it clear that she is both a woman who exists above and on earth simultaneously. Her body contains the seeds of and is the corn that grows upon the earth, and she, in Iroquoian terms, she is simultaneously both Ongwehonwe and Ongweshona, a sky world person, an original being, and also the recreation or reflection that exists on earth. She is a relational being who provides for her children so long as they remember her and follow the prescribed rituals. She also indicates that through ceremony, harmony or balance is restored to her children. For the Cherokee, both hunting and agriculture are associated with ritual prescriptions that must be followed. Mutual care is evident between the corn woman who provides and her children who follow the prescribed rituals and give thanks for what has been received. This agricultural person is a model of how a person should behave towards others. She gives of herself, providing methods for others to attain the sustenance her body provides, while also requiring accountability from her children. Those who are disrespectful and do not follow the prescribed rituals suffer consequences. Although she is said to manifest herself in the form of a woman, she is primarily associated with corn and other agricultural crops. Though not a human person, corn is a person in every way. In the Cherokee worldview, she is aware of self and others. And though I say this, that she's not a human person, though she is one of the primal parents. I think the Cherokee looked to her and to the hunter father as primal parents. So she communicates with her children and is the embodiment of compassion and forgiveness. She is involved in reciprocal relations with humans and with the earth, with the environment. She provides a link between the living and the dead, as she was the first person to die, and she connects living generations to her as she continues to provide vegetation essential to life. She is a preeminent Cherokee female role model and is the primal mother, an ancestral being, who again exists simultaneously above and below in the macrocosmic and the microcosmic realms. Okay, now the beings of the Cherokee cosmology are complex, and there are many details we do not understand. The Cherokee religious tradition is esoteric, with the most sacred aspects divulged only to the initiated. The initiated were sworn not to impart this information to uninitiated persons, whether non-Cherokee or Cherokee. If they did, the spirits above would visit them with sickness. And so in the 1830s, a Christian missionary said the only reason that Cherokee priests would divulge this information is if they had been converted to Christianity and they no longer believed in their Cherokee traditions. And so the evidence is fragmented and fragmentary. But anyway, what's more, there were priestly specialties, so no one priest would have all knowledge, except perhaps in the case of the uku or high priest. I will not attempt to describe the ways that other beings, such as the sun and fire, might be considered both earth and sky persons, which I believe they are. And documentation is it's quite fragmentary. But I will now turn to another person, the river, who is important. There are several rivers held sacred throughout the world, and you probably are familiar with them, the Ganges. Another is the Wilkamayu, the sacred river, sacred to the Inca. And that river is important in creation, mirrors the daytime path of the sun at the time of the summer solstice, and connects this earthly realm with the other world. In New Zealand, there's another river, Te Awa Tupua, and that has long been sacred to the Maori. On March 20th, 2017, something quite extraordinary happened in the modern history of sacred rivers. On this date, the government of New Zealand recognized Te Awa Tupua to be a person. While the legal significance of this event is notable, it is not unusual for indigenous peoples to consider rivers as persons. The Cherokee not only consider the river, Yunwi Gunahita, to be a person, but to be one of the most important other than human persons in their cosmology. James Mooney summarized the importance of the river, who is, quote, a giant with his head in the foothills of the mountains and his foot far down in the lowlands, speaking ever in murmurs which only the priest may interpret. I'm not quite sure about that, because there are Cherokee individuals today who still go to the river, and they're not priests, so they go to the river to hear what the river has to say. In the words of the sacred formulas, the river holds all things in his hands. His aid is invoked with prayer and fasting on every important occasion of life, from the very birth of the infant, in health and sickness, in war and love, in hunting and fishing, to ward off evil spells, and to win success in friendly rivalries. Purification in the running stream is part of every tribal function, end quote. I could just quit with his discussion, but I'm going to embellish it a little bit. From this brief description, it's already evident that from a Cherokee perspective, the river is in relationship with the Cherokee, communicating with them through language and action. For the Cherokee, the river, Yunwi Gunahita, is a person with awareness of self and others. The river is also the earthly manifestation of a more perfect and primal celestial being. In addition to the important functions Mooney listed, I will add that an individual's association with long person continued through life and afterlife into death. I will use river, or Yunwi Gunahita, long person, to describe all Cherokee rivers. However, the river has several different titles, perhaps reflective of different aspects of the river. So keep that in mind when I use this generic term for river. And it may not always be accurate. In fact, Mooney sometimes says Yunwi Gunahita, which is long person, but translates it as long man. So he wasn't consistent in his reportings. Anyway, the most common of the titles associated with the river appear to be Yunwi Gunahita, long person, but there's also long man, long snake, and great terrestrial hunter. These various titles seem to suggest the different functions. For the Cherokee, this being is not merely one specific river. For them, long person originates from the springs in the Appalachian Mountains and flows on both sides of the Continental Divide, forming the headwaters of several major rivers, most notably the Savannah and Tennessee River basins. A Cherokee human individual's intimate association with Yunwi Gunahita began at birth and continued beyond death. The newborn baby was passed over the fire and immersed in Yunwi Gunahita after birth. The newborn child was then given a medicine made with some variety of a sticker mixed with water from long person's body, taken from a waterfall or cataract where the stream makes a constant noise. The sticker ensured retention of knowledge, while the noise of the cataract from which the water was taken is believed to be the voice of Yunwi Gunahita, teaching lessons the child may understand. The infant drank this mixture for 4 successive days in order to ensure a good memory and an attentive mind. Wild Boy, one of the Cherokee primal twins, a son of Kanati and Shelu, exemplifies the relationship individuals have with the river. He was born of a mixture of blood and the river. He and his brother were instructed to follow rituals which we know from other sources would have included going to water. They are the ones that Shelu, or the Corn Mother in Sikatawa's account, instructs on how to treat her body so that corn and other vegetables will come out of the ground. But finally, after they've killed their mother, Wild Boy and his brother follow their father, Kanati the hunter, when he abandons them because they had killed their mother. Their father's trail eventually led through a portal, into the sky world. Mooney admitted in his published account that after the boys went up to find their parents, they found a large river which they crossed in a canoe. They found their mother and father on the other side of the river. A celestial river amongst the stars is the trail the boys followed, presumably also the trail that their parents traveled, the Trail of Kanati. We will see that this pathway seems to be the same that human souls also follow upon death in their journey to the darkening land. In the Cherokee worldview, the rivers that flow on the earth are sacred and animate. James Mooney classified Yunwi Gunahita as one of the elemental gods and intimates that long person was of more importance in the Cherokee ceremonial life than the sun or the fire. which are very important. Mooney said, the sun is invoked chiefly by the ball player, while the hunter prays to the fire, but every important ceremony, whether connected with medicine, love, hunting, or the ball game, contains a prayer to the long person. All Cherokee villages and towns were necessarily located next to flowing water, not only for travel, drinking, and cleansing, but for all aspects of life. In addition to the activities Mooney mentions, there were daily rituals that included going to water, where the Cherokee immersed themselves in the river. Going to water was also a central part of monthly new moon ceremonies, when the river was deemed more potent. In addition to going to water in connection with hunting, it was an essential ritual performed before and after stickball games, before and after going to war, and after release from captivity. Going to water is also essential for maintaining as well as recovering health. The ritual of going to water was also practiced by the entire community as a communal activity during important annual festivals such as the Green Corn Ceremony. Long Person is not only a source for healing and purification, a conveyor of prayers and sacrifices, but is a source of revelation. The association of streams and rivers with extra human knowledge is apparent in the practice of going to water in the early morning to listen when the stream begins to wake and talk. The revelatory aspect of Long Person is also apparent in the Cherokee deluge narrative, where a dog goes to the river tells the dog to go warn his master that there's going to be a flood and to tell him to build a raft. The river is important in medicine, gathering strength from plants into its waters and distributing the medicine to others. James Mooney explained the association between Kanati, the hunter, and the river, suggesting that the streams search out and bring down to the great river the leaves and debris of the mountain forests. In the Cherokee worldview, rivers unite the landscape and bring the strength of trees, shrubs, and other plants to the Cherokee, who richly immerse themselves in the flowing water. While autumn and spring are times when the medicinal quality of the river is strongest, some healing ceremonies were performed each month during the new moon, as I indicated before. In the moon's absence from the night sky, the river's healing properties were deemed strongest, except for the new moon in spring and August, when they were super strong. We are not told why the river's medicinal qualities are stronger at the time of the new moon, but perhaps the reasoning is the same as that of the Hopi of the Pacific coast, who scheduled their jump dance so that on the last day, the 10th day of the ceremony, when there's a new moon, the moon is able to come down to earth and join in the ceremony and in the dances. This is speculation, but perhaps for the Cherokee, the absence of the moon in the night sky signified his presence on earth, lending his significant healing and creative powers. We have seen that the sons of Kanati and Shelu followed the path of their father from this world into the next. The path seems to be that of the river. In the Cherokee narrative, the man who married the Thunder's sister, a man follows two sisters who prove not to be ordinary humans, but of another realm. And he follows them into their realm by following a path that appears to be waving grass, but was actually first a river and then streams until they get to a waterfall. And then he follows those streams and then goes through a cave into this other world, through a portal into another world. The souls of the dead also follow the river from the earthly realm to a sky realm. Will West Long, well educated in both Euro-American and Cherokee traditions, indicates that the river provides the path souls follow upon death. He said, "Some people believe that the soul went into the river and followed the river up to a spring head when it went down into an underworld." He referred to this path as the Trail of Kanati. While he used the same term underworld that James Mooney uses to refer to the other world, the underworld in this sense is the night sky. The path, according to Stansbury Hagar, is the Milky Way. At the end of the 19th century, ethnoastronomer Stansbury Hagar visited the Cherokee and collected surviving star lore. He learned from Cherokee sources that upon death, souls follow a trail across the nighttime sky. At a certain point, the soul must cross a raging river by means of a pole guarded by two dogs, represented in the night sky by two Cherokee dog stars, known commonly as Sirius and Antares. These celestial dogs, quote, guard opposite points of the sky where the Milky Way touches the horizon. The tradition is that souls, after the death of the body, cross a raging torrent on a narrow pole from which the cowardly fall off and are swept to oblivion, end quote. The fortunate or worthy souls are able to pass by two dogs who guard the passage. According to Hagar, the trail the souls follow is probably the Milky Way, generally known among North American Indians as the Path of Souls. The link between the Trail of Kanati and the Milky Way is strengthened by the Milky Way's association with the Path of Souls in many indigenous traditions, and I've cut out a paragraph that just gives a couple of examples. One is a Huron example where the Path of Souls is the Milky Way, and also another one, a Peruvian example. While no Cherokee source clearly establishes a one-to-one correspondence of the Milky Way with the Trail of Kanati, the Path of Souls, it is probable that they are one and the same, just going by different names. That the celestial pathway is conceived as a river is evident in a Cherokee prayer in which the river is addressed as Ama Ganuhida, Longwater. The text suggests a celestial origin of the river as well as an earthly presence. And so there are two prayers that I have in here that give us evidence that there is this connection. The earthly river and the celestial river are connected and are one being. So this says, live water, long water. You originated up there in the seven heavens. It is to help you with, you stated, and you have come to live upon the seven earths. So the river, according to this text, originated above in the seven heavens, the most sacred region of the sky world. The river came to live upon the seven earths, a reference to the seven clans that structure Cherokee society. That the earth mirrors the celestial realm or is a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm is a concept common to many American Indian traditions and also can be found throughout the world. The close relationship between the earthly river and its heavenly counterpart is also suggested by another prayer to Yunwi Gunahita Longperson to aid the individual in his or her journey from the earth to the utmost heights. It was used when going to water, or at least in some cases of going to water. So this is the prayer. Now listen, long person, they have just come to stand upon the very middle of your body. So the people are in the river, standing in the middle of long person's body. You are not to release them from your hand. Ha! You and I have come to elevate him or her far above to the place of utter wizardry. 7. To the place of utter wizardry. The way is open through the 7 clan districts. Ha! He has just come to aim his or her soul at the utmost 7 heights. He has just come to aim his or her soul at where the white chair is resting. And white chair is another reference to an ultimate, an ideal. Ha, you and I have just come to elevate him or her there to the 7 distant heights. So the role of the river in taking, guiding, and aiming the soul to the 7 distant heights is apparent. The river opens the way, a path through the 7 clan districts and up to the utmost 7 heights. The hand metaphor suggests that Yunwi Gunahita intimately guides the soul. This prayer requests long life in this world, but the metaphor also reveals the connection between the earthly realm and the celestial realm of the seven heights. In guiding the soul, Yunwi Gunahita unites the earthly and celestial realms. Like the Iroquois Three Sisters and the Cherokee Corn Mother, Yunwi Gunahita is not only a this world person, but also a sky person, dwelling simultaneously in both the sky realm and earthly realm. Long person is not only of both realms, but also unites these realms for others. The woman and corn are associated, I guess I was going to keep that paragraph. According to several Cherokee accounts, the Milky Way is called where the dog ran, at least in translation. It is so named because this celestial path was created when a dog ran across the night sky spewing cornmeal. The version Stanberry Hagar recorded establishes a connection between corn, two hunters, a dog, and this stellar path. In this narrative, we learn about the abduction of a woman grinding corn, her relationship to her dog, who takes the corn and spews it across the sky, and two hunters. And then I don't read the narrative, but I'll give you some interpretation. The woman and corn are associated with her home at the corn beating place far across the sky to the south, which, following the logic of the narrative, was probably represented by a once known Cherokee constellation or star. Throughout the world, stars and constellations are identified with heroes of cultural narratives. Stansbury Hagar recorded that, and this is really important, every living object on earth is the descendant of an ancestor in the sky who is represented by some star or group of stars, end quote. We might assume then that the Cherokee primal parents would have a stellar location in the sky. It is likely that the woman of this narrative and one of the hunters are associated with the corn mother and hunter, the primal parents of the narratives already mentioned. If the Milky Way is, as it appears to be, the very same path as the Trail of Kanati, we see a major link between the primal parents, corn, that makes up the Milky Way, and the celestial river that humans follow in their journey to the land of the dead. This path, made of corn, is likely called the Trail of Kanati when referring to the path of souls. It is that path Kanati took when he left this realm to follow his wife back to the sky realm after her death. It is the trail their sons followed as they tracked their father, and it is the path Cherokee souls traveled in their journey to the afterlife. For the Cherokee, Yunwi Gunahita is a person in every sense. It is both a sky and this world person and connects these realms. It is aware of self and others. It has language and communicates to humans as well as animals, probably plants too. And it is in a continuous reciprocal relationship with beings of this earth. The river is a revelator and a conductor who sustains and guides human persons from birth to beyond death. Both corn woman and long person are important other than human persons in the Cherokee cosmos. From a Western perspective, these entities, corn and flowing water, would generally be classified as things and not persons. While corn might be considered to be alive during its growth cycle, I looked this up and it is considered to be animate, a river would not generally be considered alive. In the Western world, a river is considered inanimate. But from a Cherokee viewpoint, corn and the river are both alive and are persons aware of self and others and are beings deeply enmeshed in reciprocal relationships with humans.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Thank you very much. We have, I think, plenty of time. I don't know what time you want to call it, but we should have plenty of time.
We have time to discuss.
Yeah. Okay. Randy.
one of the things that was becoming evident to me as you were telling, especially the very last part of the story, is the idea of a trail goes into their cosmology, not just their history. And I had always thought of the Trail of Tears as a part of history. Not so.
Well, you know, if you
It's
talk,
cosmology for them.
well, this trail is cosmology. Of course, trails were really important in life too. You'd follow trails,
they
hunting
decide
trails,
to-
war trails,
When
and
they decide to name the Trail of Tears the Trail of Tears, this is like the reverse of the Trail of Life, right?
well, yeah, and I'm not sure. I'm not. Yeah, that'd be something to look into. Who named the Trail of Tears the
Well,
Trail
there's
of
a
Tears?
mirroring there of
Yeah.
the Milky Way and all of a sudden, you know, it's like, who's spewing the corn now?
Yeah.
You know?
Not just that, but the water that
Yeah.
tells the story, right? The tears.
Exactly, yeah. It's
This
water.
idea of water carrying story, carrying communication.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'll have to put
Well,
that
there's a
in
paper there.
there.
I was
Yeah, that's
considering
interesting.
tears in terms of the murder of the mother and the
Mhm.
father
Mhm.
going after the
Yeah,
mother, you
this
know, and leading the way for the children to pursue. And it seemed like a mournful story.
Uh-huh.
Well,
all the way
yeah,
through.
yeah, that is really, yeah, great ideas.
I think the John A. Logan Museum had an exhibit about the Trail of Tears.
Mhm.
Recently,
Well, it passed through right here.
yeah, but I mean, I think
Yeah.
recently they had a museum exhibit about it that you might be able to access.
Oh.
They wouldn't have it online. You'd have to go to the museum and
No.
you know and talk to Mike and
Which is in town here. Right?
yeah, which is in town here, and
But-
talk to Mike and.
But
have
the
him
dual
like show us
realms,
around.
it's like they already had their trail in the Milky Way,
Mm-hmm.
and then they had their trail down here. But it's, oh my goodness, I never really saw it this way.
Well, also they
The-
go to the darkening land, which is in the west too.
Yeah,
So there's
yeah.
another parallel there because
Nothing
of
but death in Oklahoma.
Jim.
First of all, well, thank you for your brilliant paper. Yeah, I'm sucking up. But I was wondering, you know, when you read the part about Selu, instructing them what to do, they don't do it all, right?
Well, yeah, Sikatower's account. Well, I think he does too. But yeah, and James Mooney and Sikatower both indicate that she instructs them how to do it, but they don't follow her instructions exactly, and so that's why we don't have as much corn as we would have. You know, for example.
And then they further kind of introduce chaos as they try to follow them.
Oh well, yeah. In James Mooney's account that he got from Swimmer and John Axe, it's especially good in indicating how they create chaos. You know, because once they were fed without having to do any work from their mother, they were fed by their father, who only had to roll a stone away from a cave, and a deer would come out. He'd shoot it and roll the stone back.
Oh my.
But they mess things up because they kill their mother, and they also release all of the. When they try to say that they're men now, and they follow their father, see what he does, and then try to do what their father did, then they release all the animals from the cave, and so that's an element of chaos that is released in the world, as well as insects and all vermin were released.
Yeah. I was just wondering, in relation to the rivers, when the hunter, he follows the two women who he's met at the dance.
Oh yeah, and the man.
But he fails too.
Oh, the man who married the Thunder's sister. When he goes into the other world, and there's several accounts of this, of a man who follows women and wants to marry one of them. Maybe it's both, because the Cherokee did have polygamy. But anyway, he follows them, and he is given a task, a test, and in at least there are at least two accounts where he fails the task that he's given, and so he sent back to Earth. But in one account, he succeeds because he's brave and isn't scared of the rattlesnakes and the giant snake being that he has to ride, and the skull that is used as a ball. Because he's brave, he becomes the third thunder. Yeah.
How are the, because I was thinking about the rivers and such, that
Yeah.
he does travel up the river.
Yeah.
And then you have the Uktana in the rivers too, right?
Yeah, they dwell in the rivers and the deepest part of the pools in the rivers. Yeah.
Uktanai, translate?
What?
Translate Uktanai?
I don't know, but there's a Lakota term that's very similar too, and it's a giant snake as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the Cherokee version of the Uktana, it has a crystal in its forehead, and it has, in some versions, it has wings and has horns, and so it's a being it's a being of different realms.
Yeah, for Lakota, it has a diamond, so we always think of rattlesnake because a rattlesnake will have a diamond on its forehead.
Oh, uh-huh.
And so that when they talk of that animal, it's a diamond-headed snake, so they usually associate it then with the rattlesnake.
Yeah, and I believe that that there's a celestial version of it, because there is references to a giant serpent as a constellation
Well,
for
the dragon.
Native Americans.
Everybody knows the dragon, right?
Yeah, and southeastern Indians, they had a giant serpent constellation.
But is that related to the river itself?
That'd be interesting to know.
Because, there's supposed to be that big battle between the two Uktana in the Tuck, aren't there? Isn't there? Isn't that a story?
There are two, yeah, I can't remember if those were called Uktana or if they were, or what, I can't remember. There's, my memory isn't that great.
Isn't it amazing how similar, I mean, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of Egypt. And
I
the
thought of
river,
that too.
And we're separated from each other so much, and yet there's so many similarities between so many of, if you study religion and you go back, these religious practices, Eden, they're cast out as opposed to the animals being released, but again, they lose all knowledge, they lose all capability. It's just fascinating how it doesn't matter where you are, origin stories seem to have very similar platforms from which they spring.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, I think like the comparative question is always really interesting too. I was thinking of like Chinese classical sort of religion, the relationship to Qiang, I think, heaven, right? Kevin can correct me, right? And these sorts of things. And then the Eden comparison, I think, is pretty obvious. But what struck me as being interesting in that case was the difference, right? So in the Eden story, there's food, there's a fruit, right, and there's all this, and then they're cast out. But the reason is knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. I thought it was very interesting that in the Corn Mother story, you said it was the reason that they murdered their mother was because they found her monstrous, right?
Well,
because she created food out of her body.
Yeah, they considered her a witch.
What an interesting origin story for like your original sin story, kind of, right? Like Freud is
Well, it's
having
the
a
same
field day
story,
probably,
isn't
yeah.
it?
Well, I don't know.
It's
Like,
right down to it.
well, is it though? I mean, the desire for knowledge,
Yeah.
it seems a very different thing to me. I don't know, like
Yeah, to reject
your mother in this sort
to
of
bite the hand that feeds
Yeah.
you. Yes. Yes, Jim.
But
Oh, wait, just a second. You haven't.
Question, not knowing the cosmology or philosophy of Cherokee, but thinking of other Native people, is there a particular time period when we conceive of as people or individuals become a person?
When individuals
in
become
the
a person,
Cherokee cosmology?
I can't I don't know. If you think about the little,
ceremony or
Naming
certain,
ceremony, yeah.
when they become.
passage.
Yeah,
Okay.
when does a baby become a person?
Well, there's one account in the 1720s where they indicates that they had naming practices where they would name a child after an ancestor. And among a lot of Native American traditions that there's evidence for, naming ceremonies when a child is born and naming after an ancestor is part of a rebirth concept. That there's at least some aspect of the ancestor that is reborn in a child. But as far as becoming a person, the Cherokee individuals would have names at different stages in their lives, and sometimes they would be given a name later in life that would kind of match their personality or something that they had done, like dragging canoe. Was a Cherokee warrior who was supposed to have, his father told him he could go to battle with them if he could drag the canoe to the river, so he put it over his back and drug it to the river, is the legend. But anyway, when a person got to a point where they would be named because of something that they did, that's a possibility. But I think for the Cherokee, being a person was a process, because one Cherokee individual I know said that he was told by his parents when he was growing up, if he did something wrong, they never spanked him, they never hit him or anything like that. They just said, that's not how a real person acts. That's not how a Cherokee acts.
Wow.
And so, it was, I think, a process.
I remember my Choctaw friend telling me, and this is a Choctaw sage, but he said one of the things that the Choctaw had a hard time understanding about European culture was that the way they chased around babies. He says, we never do that. He says, we never do that with the Choctaws. We just let them go wherever they want to go, and if they drown, or if they, then we say they didn't want to live.
Oh, wow.
I know. This was a shocking thing to hear, but they said they did. He said they didn't name the children initially until they knew whether the children wanted to live or not, and that had something to do with sort of getting through all of the processes of choosing, and they didn't assume. So in other words, it was already an individual as soon as it arrived, and then you waited to see what it would do. And if it wanted to live, it would. And if it didn't want to live, then it would, it would challenge a rattlesnake, or something like that. And he says, I know how this sounds to you. But you don't respect autonomy like we do. He says,
Yeah.
autonomy goes all the way down for us.
Oh, yeah, and
It goes down into infancy. You're already an individual. Whether you become a person, it's your choice.
That's interesting because, like for the Cherokee, autonomy was really important too, because a warrior didn't have to go to war if he chose not to go. They were not, forced to go there. There was no repercussions except for maybe what people thought of you or something like that.
Didn't have to go to the draft board to be a conscientious objector?
No.
Like my husband did?
No. Jim?
I never thought of this before. We've talked about this a lot, but I never thought about this before. It seems to me one of the important differences from the Eden story is that Shelu comes down from the heavens.
From above. Yeah.
Kanati doesn't.
Well, that's not clear, because there's an
He
old.
is the laziest creature.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's another Cherokee narrative where the Kanati, the hunter, is the laziest of all animals, until he sees the corn woman, and then he becomes inspired, and builds her a house, and then they become.
But he doesn't finish it, right? It's all except the bathroom and the kitchen floor, right?
He finishes it, so she will marry
he does
him.
finish it. Okay.
Yeah,
But
but
does this relate to the wise women and the idea, women had a lot of power.
Yeah.
And when you married, it was matrilineal too. When you married, you were part of the wife's family.
That's right.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, when you had a child.
What,
Well,
that,
when you married too.
when you married, you moved into the wife's clan. You lived with her people, and
And
if you were, yeah,
She
and
could dump you.
she would just put your belongings outside the house, and
It's
then
still the
you,
same.
and you were divorced. You know, it was very easy. But the child had identity through the mother's clan. It was, that was their clan, and their mother. For girls, their mother and their mother's sisters taught the girls, and the boys were taught by their mother's brothers. So.
Mm-hmm.
What time period would they have been in northern Illinois? Do you know?
In northern Illinois.
Well, there were Iroquois, but there were no Cherokee.
There were no Cherokee?
But they are Iroquoian.
Yeah.
Well,
So they're related.
I'm curious because in religious studies, the question always comes up, where did Joseph Smith come up with the idea of multiple heavens? And you started talking about the 7 different celestial, and I went, I wonder why they were.
Well,
Oh.
Swedenborgians.
It's always been a question. Where
Yeah.
did he come up with that idea? Because that is very different. That diverges extremely from any other.
Well, actually, it's in the Bible too.
It's in
There's-
the Bible. I was about to
Oh, is
say.
it? Okay.
Even
There-
Paul talks about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in the
But it's-
Kabbalah, you talk about the 7 heavens. Or something.
Okay.
And then in Swedenborg, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
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 No,
Yes.
it's
He
a
was
part of the
never
Christian tradition
credited
too.
with that much education. So
But-
it's just
Well,
curious
that's
if
certainly
he
true.
was
Well, one
hanging out
thing.
with Native Americans and went ding ding ding.
Well, one
Yeah,
thing
there is
that makes me think of Joseph Smith might have got some ideas from Native Americans is other concepts like the importance of ancestors, and because ancestors are really important in Mormon thought,
And
and
also the river, the big picture of Jesus on the raft in the middle of the Mississippi River.
well,
Go to Nauvoo and see the.
Oh,
see
do
the
they have
painting.
a giant Jesus in the Mississippi? And not
well,
really?
in Manti, Utah, they have a Indian Jesus in the temple.
Now, but there's a guy up in New York that Lori claimed that might have influenced Joseph Smith. You know.
Well, there were plenty of Iroquois up there.
No,
Yeah.
Where
this
it
is,
came from.
Yeah.
This is a guy, roughly a contemporary,
Well,
who
all right.
had revelations. It was Native American. Was he Iroquois or was he Seneca?
No, I'm having a brain freeze. And my
Yeah.
mind is, but yeah, I
You
know.
read that dissertation.
Yeah, well, I read part of it. I haven't finished it. It was really long.
And a lot of the stuff was a bit of a stretch. Too.
Yeah, it was. It was Iroquois, and it had to, but I can't remember. Sorry.
The Talk of the Living River has me thinking within my own discipline in environmental thought that today we do think of rivers as living, and just to think of soil as living.
Right.
It's not that it's not a consciousness or anything, but it just is so dense with life, and we even pull aside some rivers and call them dead if they have been so polluted or so damaged that they can no longer
Oh,
hold
yeah.
that dense life.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a good correction because, traditionally in the Western perspective, that's not true, but things have changed a lot since Darwin and others that have drawn our attention to our connections with the natural world.
Oh, go ahead.
You mentioned the Maori.
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 Okay, yeah,
Okay.
Maori.
New
Bad
Zealand,
pronunciation.
yeah.
But and how they legally defined a river as a person.
Mhm.
Okay. Now,
It was the government of New Zealand
Yes.
recognizing what the Maori had believed for, since time immemorial. Yeah.
okay. But I'm going to let Sabrina, because she knows more about this than I do.
Wait a minute.
There is a connection. There is a
Yeah,
connection. When Natalie Long was here and she was trying to work with fracking, she worked with an organization that came out of Pennsylvania, and they weren't specifically involved with fracking. They were an environmental group, And one of the philosophical theories behind their organization, and I can't remember the name of their organization, you will be able to remember it. It was some kind of like a political organization group, like
Well, they thought
Like-
communities are people, among other things. Yeah, I think this was.
remembering the acronym.
Yeah.
so-
yeah,
Yeah.
but anyway, they thought that part of their ethics or their philosophical theory of this, it was like a what do you call it? Not a pack, but a
The Community Bill of Rights that they were trying to
right,
get passed.
right,
Yeah.
right. But it wasn't
Yeah.
just the Community Bill of Rights I'm speaking of. They had a prior belief that nature had legal rights,
Yeah.
and that when you mentioned the Maori, that brought up that idea that in this community we had like a whole bunch of little. You hosted one. We had a bunch of little local community groups trying to get people to work together towards being more politically active about environmental issues.
Yeah.
Because the basic underlying belief of this organization was that the land and the water and the air were entities that deserved legal protection.
Yeah.
As
Or
entities.
legal standing.
And-
Yeah.
As,
yeah.
as
Yeah.
entities,
Yeah.
though.
Standing
Right.
and therefore protection.
Well, when you were talking about that, just reminded me of the Hopi. And the Hopi, their ancestors, as Kachinas, they pass from this earth into the cloud realm as rain, as mist and rain, and they cycle back into the earth and go through this cycle. And so, you know, they are connected to the water very intimately because they are the
They
rain.
are the water.
They are the rain. They are the
Yeah,
clouds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And water's right scarce where they come from.
Yeah. In Light of Reverence is a really good documentary if you haven't seen it, and it has a segment on the Hopi, and it has that in there about the ancestors and the rain and the clouds.
I think you said at the very beginning that the basic definition of a person is someone who's aware of themselves and aware of others in their community. Is that what-
Language
is that what
also.
you said?
Language,
she,
yeah.
she even
Yeah.
raised the ante by saying language has to be there.
Right.
The river talks.
Yeah.
The corn mother talks.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, like how that awareness of self and others plays out for them, or just kind of expanding on it a little bit more because I'm interested in that.
Yeah, for the Cherokee?
Yeah, whatever you want to say, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. Because I'm not Cherokee.
Yeah.
And also because this tradition has been very decimated, you only get ideas of their belief through these sources. Some people still are connected with their tradition in deep ways, and some people still speak the language, which would also give them a greater insight into all of this. But with language, you are part of a community. You're not. You can't be a person without interacting with other beings. And
Yeah, there's just a lot of interesting questions that makes me like. So, for example, we were talking about this idea of knowledge, and we were talking about the recognition of children or infants as persons or not, right? Was it Choctaw? What is Choctaw?
Choctaw.
Yeah, the Choctaw example that Randy gave, right? Is
They're individuals, but the question is whether they want to be persons.
right, like, and it's okay if you don't know the actual answer, but I'm just
Yeah.
kind of trying to think about what do we mean by to recognize, like, as self? Like, when does self-knowledge like a toddler, like, they're not a person yet because they don't have full self-knowledge, or is that
That's what Lee Hester was saying.
right?
He was saying they are individuals. They are utterly autonomous. and then you wait to see whether they wish to become part of the community.
Right.
Well, they're on their way to becoming
Sure.
more and more persons. That's the question. Is, it's probably a sliding scale.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
There is something called the terrible twos.
Or like, so another example, just like, since all these things are so interrelated, the idea of the corn mother story with the killing the mother, seeing her as this monster, right? There's a sense in which that's a failure to recognize personhood, right? That instead of seeing their mother as a person and therefore being in community or communion, by the way, the eating of the food, the communion, right? Like, instead of, they fall out of communion with their mother, and then that's almost the sin, right? Is failing to see their mother as a person. I don't know, like, there's all these
Right.
interesting
Right.
things that come out of
To
this.
separate.
Carrie,
Yes.
I was wondering, with what you were saying here, remember, it's the wild boy who is born out of a kind of clot of blood in
Yeah,
the
he's
river,
out of nature. Yeah.
who
and-
persuades his brother to kill the mother.
Right. Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, in the Iroquoian tradition, there is sapling and flint, or smooth mind and wrinkled mind, and it is only one of the twins that kills the mother, and that is Flint, who comes out of his mother's side. And so the Iroquois tradition has oppositional twins. The Cherokee doesn't have oppositional twins,
The
but
wild boy's not evil, he's just kind of
Wild.
yeah, Wild
Yeah.
Boy isn't evil, but he comes up with the ideas that lead to chaos. that
He's not
leads-
evil, but he's not cultured either.
Yeah.
And to be cultured is to be part of the community. He's sort of
Yeah.
outside the community.
Yeah, and so the other boy just kind of goes along with
Cain and
them,
Abel,
so you
right?
don't
Yeah.
have
Cain and
that.
Abel.
It's probably, if you were to go back in time and hear other versions of the story, you might come up with other, things too. But and there may have been more of a sapling flint kind of thing there going on, an oppositional twin going on, and there is one Cherokee narrative in which the natural son kills Wild Boy. But
well,
that's just very
sapling and flint, they have a
yeah, sapling and flint too. In the Iroquois tradition,
they
there
have a
sapling
long
does
famous showdown.
eventually kill Flint, but in the Cherokee, there is one Cherokee account that indicates that the one twin kills the other. So, but whether that was influenced by the Cain and Abel story or whether that was a thing that goes way, way back, I don't know. But anyway,
I actually want to finish my Choctaw story since it's so shocking. I did say to the person who told me this story, I said, "You're telling me, this is such a Western perspective, that Choctaw mother sees her 2-year-old child wandering towards the lake or towards the pond and doesn't go and get the child." He says, "No, the first time she does," and she tells them the story of the swallowing pond. The first time she does, and it's the swallowing pond. Next time he heads that way, she says, "Remember the swallowing pond," and that's it. I mean, it's like you get one warning.
yeah,
But obviously they have to be to the point that, and you have to tell them in the right way. Pond swallows. You want to go be with the pond? You want to stay with us, right? It's that kind of thing. And then he's headed that way again. She says, "Swallowing pond." And that's all you get, but
Right.
there's still language
Yeah.
that is exchanged.
Yeah.
And my skepticism was certainly expressed. It's like, I don't believe any mother is not going to stop the child. It's like, yeah, she stops the child. She tells the child the story of
story.
swallowing pond.
yeah.
And then from there on, it's like, pond swallows.
Yeah, and in connection with your question about when do you become a person, one thing that Tom Belt, a Cherokee friend of ours, said is that he was about 10 to 12 years old before he was included in adult conversations because it takes about that long for a child to master the Cherokee language to be able to speak fully conversantly in the language. And so so that might be a part of that process of becoming a person, is to be able to fully express yourself in the language and the many nuances that the language is able to express. Also, when you're talking about stories, that's how Cherokee would teach their children, is through stories as well. And when talking about education, I was thinking about that. Jesus teaching through parables, Cherokee teaching through stories, Choctaw teaching through stories. But that's one thing, is because with stories, you teach through stories, but there's not this obvious lesson. The child has to think about it and then draw the conclusions. There's a process of developing the child and the child's mind by pondering.
Well,
these
swallowing
things.
pond is not bad. It's a different way of being. Do you want to be with the swallowing pond, or do you want to be with us?
Yeah, because
you can't be with both.
Yeah, and
It's
it's
either them or us.
and swallowing pond would be a place you could go and it would be fine.
Sure,
If
that's right. They don't demonize the swallowing pond.
Okay, so how old is the kid to be able to understand when the mother is telling the story?
I asked
of
that
the
question. They have to be
swallowing
old enough to understand it,
24.
but it also has to be but it also has to be told in a way that they can understand it at whatever point that they're
pond.
endangering
Okay, so what
themselves.
happens to the kid during all those years when it's not yet old enough to understand that?
Well, I don't know. I'm going to intervene here. This is a materialist explanation of this personhood naming rite of passage thing. And it may not be so important to the kid knowing, but it's important to the rest of the community dealing with the fact that there is a high rate of infant mortality
Yeah, kids
in
die.
most
Yeah.
societies. And it just adjusts the brain that it's not necessarily tragic, it just happens.
That's true. That's where they
Yeah,
come
but,
from. Lots of kids die.
I'm just
And
questioning. I
So,
mean, the story doesn't add up. That's what I'm saying.
Well, it didn't add up to me either.
it's
But
just,
But
No, I don't
it's,
mean,
it's
no, I
that
don't
gloss,
mean,
it's
no,
that
I
gloss
don't mean it
where
doesn't add up in
Psycho-
terms of presuppositions.
means
I mean.
of,
It doesn't add up in terms of just the story. The story doesn't make sense that you tell the first time, the second time the kid ever goes to the pond.
Mhm.
You tell it this explanation.
Mhm. No, you tell it a story. It's not an explanation.
Okay, it's not, the kid that age is not old enough
Right.
to understand this explanation.
on the other hand, the kids are learning to listen to their elders.
That's right.
And the elders
An important
supposedly
value.
impart practices that across the board have been beneficial to the community.
Weren't they also kept in board?
And
What?
The
so
civil
just
board or
the
village?
generation of listen to your elders, no matter what, the particular tale is maybe more the story for the real little kid.
But they're also part of a community, and it's a village that, to raise a child. There's going to be people all around
Yeah.
usually,
Mhm.
and little older kids will probably say,
That's right,
"Remember
that's right,
the
yeah,
swallowing
yeah.
pond?"
Yeah,
There's
he
going to
said
be.
that. He said that. He said, "Oh, there's people wandering around all over the place, and everybody looks after everybody, sort of." But still, I mean, the idea that you would run after the child to prevent it from doing this or that or the
Yeah.
other. He said this doesn't even make any sense to
Not-
us.
They
Well, I
weren't
also
help-
don't think you're talking about infants, probably
Toddlers.
toddlers,
Yeah.
because they would have been in a pickleball player.
Yeah, but I mean, some
Yeah.
people don't have the naming ceremonies
So-
till kids are in their toddler.
Right, and by then they can start understanding basic directives
Mm-hmm.
by the time they're able to walk. 'Cause you have
I think you're really right about having the older children correct the younger children being a really crucial part of this. That everybody lives together and there are not that many, and everybody sort of watches everybody else, and there's no real privacy or place to hide because this isn't even an idea that they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. They lived together. At least, the Cherokee did, and a lot of Native American communities. So if you get to other communities, some didn't live in villages. Some, like the Navajo and Apache, apparently lived in more dispersed settlements. But those that lived together in communities, I think, would hold true for.
Well, and just stories for corrections, that's, I mean, Brothers Grimm, if you read the original stories, not the made for Disney, but the real ones.
They're
Yeah.
pretty grim. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. A lot of them
But
are.
yes, correction, don't
But-
do that or else.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah.
It's really interesting with the Apache. If you've read Wisdom Sits in Places, has anybody read that by Keith Basso? It's a really good book about how at least the Western Apache teach moral lessons through stories. And like he gives an example of one Apache girl who went to a female ceremony wearing her hair in curlers because she'd been away at boarding school and wearing pink curlers was the thing. But for an Apache woman, you're supposed to wear your hair long and flowing, and so that was a real no-no. But nobody said anything to this girl, except for a couple of weeks later when they were gathered for another occasion. Her grandmother told a story about an Apache policeman who was working for the white people, and he brought in an Apache who had killed a cow because his family was starving, to tell his superior officer, white guy, what had happened. But somebody had been working on his mind, so he couldn't remember what he went in there for. But anyway, she tells this story, which the moral of the story, which isn't stated explicitly, but is that you should not betray your own people. But anyway, so the grandmother tells this story, and the girl, she doesn't name any names, but the girl gets up and walks out. And Keith Basso asks the grandmother, what was the matter with her? And the grandmother says, well, I shot her with an arrow. I shot her with a story. So that was a way of teaching, and the Apache used this way to teach, teach their the next generation the stories that they as a people, the morals that they reverence. But anyway, they also are connected with places in the landscape. And so later, Keith Basso talked to this girl, and they passed by this place, which is called Man Stands Above Here and There. And he pointed to that place, and he said, something about that story. And the girl told him, yeah, that every time I go past this place, I remember that, and I remember to live right. And one of the points Keith Basso makes, the other people that he talked to, Apache people make, is that when the Apache move away from the Apache land, that's a real problem, because they don't learn how to live right, because they're not connected with the stories, they're not connected with the lessons, the moral lessons associated with those stories. And then also the Navajo that are also an Athabascan-speaking people. Trudy Griffin Pierce has a really great book, Mother Earth, Father Sky, something like that, where she taught, anyway, part of it she talks about the importance of constellations and stars for the Navajo, and how there are stories associated with the constellations, with the stars, that teach moral lessons. And so the sky is like a Bible or like a textbook which teaches. And so the children would be taught lessons, stories associated with the stars. They would see them in the night sky. They also learned those constellations and stars through string games that would represent the stars, and also in sand paintings and rattle games. So they would be, stuff that they just learned and would be part of their everyday life too. So I think that's cool.
All right. Well, we've
Is that-
probably reached
Yeah, it's 8:30, I think. So unless anyone wants to ask one final pressing question. Oh, round of applause then for.
Thank you.